A few weeks ago, I did a video on what presentation and/or lure won the most money in the 2020 tour season. Well, today I wanted to go into a little bit more depth and really talk about the one thing I discovered I think that we can all benefit from. If you didn't see that video that I put out a couple weeks ago, it came down and said the lure that, or the presentation that won the most money in the 2020 tour season was by far and away the drop shot rig, and those were the winners from Major League Fishing, FLW, and the Bassmaster Elite Series. And then some of the other ones that came up there near the top were your deep diving crankbaits and those types of things. But when I really started to break down and analyze the information, and most importantly, read the articles about each of the winners, and this is what I focused on, was the winners of these events, is that there was one common factor that ran in the actual descriptions that the winners talked about. And that one common thread was the use of their electronics. Now, before we get into a great big debate about whether or not electronics should be used in competition, we can take something from this and apply it to our own fishing. So each of these winners, basically what they were saying is that there was lots and lots of searching that was going on that made the difference, that put them from that middle of the pack where everybody was catching, 2-3 pound fish, and just elevated them above the rest of the crowd. And it was the use of their electronics or searching time that did that for them. Now, like I said, most of us as recreational anglers, we can't go out and put $10,000 worth of graphs on the bow of our boat, okay? There's even one angler out there that is running a graph for each of the 3 major brands up on the bow, not because they're sponsored by all 3 of those, but because they have the Garmin for the live scope. They have the 360 imaging on the Humminbird that is sitting up in the front, and then they're using a Lowrance for the down imaging. Okay, that's how important that searching process is for them. And like I said, most of us cannot possibly afford to do that, and the debate about electronics has been around since the very first flashers and paper graphs were used on bass boats many, many decades ago. But what we can take from this is the fact that expanding our knowledge of an area is absolutely critical to, one, not only catching more bass, but also catching better quality of fish as well. And I want to break this down 2 ways, for those anglers that do have some electronics and for those anglers that do not, and how you can use this process. So first of all, if you have some electronics on your boat, probably it's safe to say that most of us do not use them to their full capacity, and some of the images that show up on there, we may or may not be real sure what it is marking as far as when it comes to density levels, different types of vegetation, that type of stuff. So probably the easiest thing to do is when you go out with your electronics is start to idle over things that you know, whether it's a brush pile that you know where it is located, or it's a boat ramp or a rock pile, and see what they look like on your graph. Then you can take that information and apply it to other parts of the lake. One of the very common issues, especially for anglers that fish with lots of vegetation, is setting their sensitivity levels to the point where they're kind of cutting through the clutter of all the weeds and getting to the bottom composition that is below that vegetation. Where is there a hard spot or a soft spot? So these are things we can all practice with as anglers. Now, so if you have those electronics and you're going out on your home lake and for an evening of fishing, once you go ahead and hit that boat dock or that brush pile where you know the location of them and your history has helped you in the past, take a couple minutes, 3, 4, 5 minutes, and idle around that one particular area. Is there another brush pile that's farther out that you didn't know about? Is there a big boulder sitting out there? Did somebody sink some Christmas trees? Is there a pile of tires? All these things that could be right there where you're fishing, but you didn't know that they were actually there. So every time if you go out on the lake that you know or the river that you know, and you take 3 or 4 or 5 minutes and just expand that area that you understand, that area of knowledge, you're going to start to find some pretty interesting stuff and probably catch better fish. Now, what about those anglers that don't have electronics? I like to take either a really heavy jig or a big heavy Texas rig. So I might go up and fish a brush pile, you know, with a small Texas rig, or flip a dock with a wacky rig. And then I'm gonna go ahead and put that down and pick up that real heavy jig, maybe a 3/4 ounce jig, and start to fan cast that area around the place that I already know, and just drag that jig back, checking bottom composition. What can I feel? Do I feel something different out there that I didn't know was there? This is exactly how I found a really nice shell bed up on the Mississippi River. I was fishing a jig down a weed line, then all of a sudden I came to an area where the bottom composition was very different. I remember dragging it through there going, whoa, that's a hard spot right there, and boom, immediately caught a fish. After a little bit more probing with the jig, the shell bed was probably 2 or 3 times the size of the boat, and every time since that I go back to this spot, it is always good for 5 or 6 quality fish. Now this particular one, I found it by accident. But it doesn't have to be. If we take that heavy jig and go out and, like I said, fan cast the areas we know and expand them a little bit, we're going to find these places that are holding more bass, and most of the time going to be a better quality of fish as well. Now imagine if you've done this either with that heavy jig or with your electronics over the course of an entire season. Think about how many more places that you're going to find. I know on my home lake, if I did that consistently and I found 4 or 5 money spots, or 4 or 5 spots that I know are good for a good fish, I'd be pretty happy with the amount of time that I put into that searching phase. And hey, if you'd like to watch a video that talks about finding subtle places where bass like to hide, go ahead and check this one out right here. And don't forget to go out and encourage someone today. You never know how you might just change their life. For the Bass Fishing Life, I'm your host, Steve Rogers.